As I look at the budget, Speaker, the budget, of course, affects everything, as you well know. We're looking at $89 billion initial budgets from the House and the Senate, a couple $100 million apart, not very much of a difference. And we're told that there's a spending cap of $93.5 billion, so we have a little bit of room to go up. Do you believe that with a $93.5 billion spending cap, we can accomplish everything that this aspirational state wants to accomplish?
I think we can make major strides forward in some of the most difficult, challenging areas that we've made very little progress on. In fact, have gone the other way on in recent years. So
those would
I'm feeling
include
very
what?
good.
Those would include what?
Include public education, higher education,
right?
Water for sure,
right?
And see what we can do on transportation infrastructure. And I would also add another area that you don't think of as a spending area, but for years and years, this whole issue of dedicated accounts,
right,
have built up. And we haven't been using the money for their intended purpose. I think we can make meaningful strides in reversing that trend in this session.
Well, let me ask you, since you bring that up, let me ask you about that specifically. The governor talked about wanting to return money to the transportation budget in his State of the State that had been diverted elsewhere to DPS. It was about $1.3 billion, if I understand correctly. Now, I may not understand adequately how this works, but if he takes that money out of DPS and redirects it back to transportation, you all are not going to unfund DPS. Aren't you just going to have to find another $1.3 billion somewhere else?
If we were to do that, yes.
So then how would one of these fund diversions being undiverted not result in an increase in spending? It's a pig and a snake. If it goes down here, it's got to come up over here, isn't it?
Well, that's why I said you don't think of that as normally a spending thing.
Yeah.
But it can be.
You would acknowledge it may ultimately be a spending.
Money has to be found somewhere.
Now, on water,
but also, I think it's very important that whatever hard decisions we make that are budget related, that the public has some confidence that we're telling them the truth.
Right.
That's more important to me.
Truth in budgeting.
That's more important to me than the decisions we make.
Right. On a couple of those items you mentioned, Mr. Speaker, transportation and water, the assumption seems to be those funds to kickstart those big ticket items will come out of the rainy day fund. Even the governor now, who has previously been reluctant to take money out of the rainy day fund, has called for $3.7 billion in his State of the State for infrastructure, which we assume is water and transportation. Last week, Chairman Pitts and Chairman Williams were talking about more like $4 to $5 billion all in. They were both with Chairman Ritter, $2 billion for water.
I need to keep those guys separated.
You do, I think that's right. They were talking about $2 billion for water. Chairman Pitts was talking about possibly $2 billion for transportation. Chairman Williams even talked about $3 billion. The question seems to be, number one, do you have the votes in both houses, 2/3 of both houses, very conservative members of the House and Senate, to get money out of the rainy day fund at all? And second, is it going to count toward the spending cap? Let me ask you to address the first question. Do you think, knowing the House as you do, the Senate is more conservative this session, Speaker, with many of your former members going into the Senate than it was last session? Do you have 2/3 in both houses to take anything out of the rainy day fund?
I think to come up with a real solution for our water challenges using the rainy day fund, which I'm told by Chairman Ritter we can do, I think we will have the votes for that.
You think you will have the votes for the rainy day fund on the water?
I can't imagine voting against a solution to our water problems in Texas.
Right. What about transportation? Do you have the votes for that?
Don't know. I don't know enough about whether that's much of a solution,
right,
or whether it's a temporary thing and not really all that meaningful.
Yeah.
That requires more study and I think a separate argument. But the water funding solution in both the House and the Senate versions of the bill, and that bill by Chairman Ritter, I don't think went unnoticed that it was filed on the third day of the session.
Yeah.
I believe that is a solution for years to come that's meaningful, and I can't imagine anyone voting against that.
Sounds like you're for it.
Yes.
Are you similarly for transportation yourself out of the rainy day fund, or are you not quite sure?
I have an open mind, but I want to see what that translates to.
What exactly is the
If you could convince me that using money from the rainy day fund for transportation was a meaningful step forward, more than just a 2-year gap filler, and that it was truly meaningful, then sure, I'd keep an open mind to that.
Speaker, what about the second question that now everyone seems to be discussing in the Capitol, which is whether the withdrawals from the rainy day fund would count toward the spending cap? Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst, the chairman last week, both talked about, we're talking to lawyers, we think that we can work this in such a way that the rainy day fund withdrawals would not count toward the spending cap. However, I read in the Texas Tribune that testifying before the Senate Finance Committee. Ursula Banks, the director of the Legislative Budget Board, said, quote, revenue in the rainy day fund is subject to the spending limit, period. Not conditional, no hedging. She said it pretty much directly that it would apply to the spending limit, which it seems like would tie your hands.
Maybe, but we'll have to work through it if that's the case.
Right. I mean, the amount of money that's being talked about by the governor and by Chairman Pitts, Chairman Williams, is actually more than is available, difference between the base budget and the spending cap. I mean, it really seems like it would limit your ability to do many of the things you're talking about.
It could, but I'm sure there are ways to work through it.
Are you trying similarly on your side to get guidance that you could actually not apply to the spending cap?
I'm aware of that opinion.
Yeah. Okay. On the water issue, I'm aware of that opinion. Okay.